the experience of profound internal upheaval, the sudden, unsettling sensation that life is unraveling, is, in the view of Carl Jung, not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. This psychological disturbance often signals the initiation of the most potent, soul-aligned phase of one's existence, the individuation process. This is the lifelong, often painful, unfolding of the self, the movement toward becoming a whole, differentiated, and unique person. Jung mapped the precise psychological phenomena that accompany this massive energetic shift within the psyche, detailing how the established structure of the personality must first dissolve before the authentic self can emerge. Follow us to discover the power on yourself while we guide you through this path to the best version of you. Click the like button and subscribe if you would like transform your life. Part 1. The cracking of the ego and the call of the self. At the foundation of transformation lies the ego's disruption. The ego, the center of consciousness, is the narrative structure we build. Our roles, our social identities, our preferences, and our history. It is the part of us that says, "I am this." Jung noted that most people mistake this surface structure for their total being, and when the soul is ready to evolve, this structure must be destabilized. The sacred dissatisfaction. The first unmistakable sign of this shift is a growing, pervasive dissatisfaction with the status quo. Things that once provided security or joy, a career, a social circle, long-held beliefs, suddenly feel hollow and meaningless. This is the psyche withdrawing its energy from what Jung termed the persona, the mask we wear for society. The ego interprets this hollowness as failure or depression, yet in depth psychology, it means the ego is cracking open. This is immediately followed by the shattering of the illusion of control. The ego relies on predictability. Transformation, however, is inherently chaotic. The loss of control is painful, but it signals growth, initiating a psychic movement inward. The voice of the true self. A strange inner pull begins to assert itself, a persistent feeling that this isn't who I really am. This isn't mere self-doubt. It is the true self, Jung's term for the total central archetype of the personality, knocking. The unconscious mind, previously dormant, is now demanding attention, setting the stage for the individuation process, which begins with the recognition that the ego has limits and cannot carry the full burden of meaning. Part 2. The psychic death and descent into the void. As the ego fragments, the psyche enters a necessary period of psychic death. This is the dissolution of outdated psychological structures, without which rebirth cannot occur. This stage feels terrifying because it closely mimics symptoms of clinical depression. The Alchemical Nigredo. The key manifestation here is a profound feeling of emptiness, numbness, or detachment. Energy is withdrawn from the old life. Hobbies and ambitions lose their vitality. This is the Nigredo blackening stage in alchemical psychology, a descent into darkness and chaos. Crucially, this void carries meaning. It signals that the soul has outgrown its former reality and is preparing to be reset. The old psychological unity is lost, and everything is being dismantled to rebuild on a truer foundation. The demand for surrender. This stage is defined by surrender. The ego fights, attempting to fix the pain or return to the past, often through distraction or addiction. Jung insisted that true transformation requires facing the darkness directly and allowing the old self to die with full awareness. The paradox is that the more one surrenders to this inner death, the quicker the potential for rebirth arrives, resulting in a profound liberation from the need to perform or pretend. Part 3. The uprising of the unconscious. As the dominant ego structure weakens, the unconscious rises to the surface, bringing with it the great storehouse of potential, archetypes, and hidden wisdom. This signifies that the individual is no longer guided solely by conscious logic, but by a deeper, transformative force. The symbolic language of dreams. One of the most powerful signs of this uprising is the change in nocturnal life. Vivid, symbolic, and strange dreams. Jung viewed dreams as compensatory, attempting to balance what the conscious mind lacks. If waking life is overly rational, the dream may erupt with images of passion or chaos. These dreams, often populated by powerful archetypal figures, the hero, the shadow, the wise elder, act as spiritual blueprints, offering insight the intellect cannot yet grasp. Synchronicity and intuition. The world begins to speak to the individual through synchronicity, meaningful coincidences where the external world aligns perfectly with the inner state. These uncanny alignments suggest that the individual is being guided by unseen forces. Concurrently, intuition breaks through the ego's logic. You begin to feel things before you can understand them, drawn to symbols, people, or emotions without conscious reason. This is the authentic voice of the self asserting itself, demanding depth over superficiality. Part 4. Confronting the shadow. The rising unconscious doesn't only bring wisdom, it brings confrontation. The first major force to emerge is the shadow, the sum total of everything the ego has repressed, denied, or disowned. Anger, resentment, selfishness, primal desires. Encountering the shadow is not optional, it is essential for wholeness. Emotional turbulence and projection. The emergence manifests as intense emotional turbulence and reactivity. You may become highly sensitive to triggers, experience uncharacteristic rage, or feel deep shame for previously suppressed thoughts. The most telling sign is projection, where disowned traits are seen and hated in others. Every powerful negative reaction to another person becomes a mirror. What part of me am I seeing in them that I refuse to accept in myself? Integrating the darkness. The shadow's function is to complete the self. If you have identified strongly with your persona, for example, the good person, the shadow will bring out suppressed rage or bitterness, forcing you to acknowledge that your goodness came at the expense of your reality. Facing the shadow destroys the idealized self-image, which, while destructive to the ego, is sacred to the self. Integration means realizing that your light becomes stronger when it has roots in your darkness, transforming formerly destructive energies into sources of integrity and power. Jung famously stated, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Part 5. The intensification of inner conflict. As the forces of the ego, the shadow, the persona, and the self begin to interact, the inner world devolves into a psychological battleground, a conflict of opposites. This state is not pathology. It is a necessary purification process where the soul consciously confronts its fragmented nature. The tension of opposites, enantiodromia. The individual feels torn between opposing forces, compassion versus resentment, longing for intimacy versus dread of vulnerability, the desire for freedom versus a secret clinging to comfort. Jung termed this enantiodromia, the tendency for things to turn into their opposite. Psychological wholeness is achieved not by resolving these contradictions prematurely, but by holding the tension of the opposites. The courage to sit in this internal fire is what transforms the person. The fires of moral conflict. This tension escalates into existential and moral conflict. The individual is forced to ask, am I living in alignment with my deepest truth? The pressure created by these unanswered questions is the soul's fire, burning away all that is false, performative, and conditioned. The storm is not destructive. It is cleansing, allowing the individual to emerge from the contradictions into a state of authentic embodiment. Part 6. Sacred Solitude and the Withdrawal from the Collective. A profound and often bewildering psychological shift is the spontaneous withdrawal from the social collective and an intense craving for sacred solitude. This is not misanthropy. It is a deep-seated necessity for the self to reclaim its psychic territory. Disinterest in social noise. The individual develops a growing disinterest in small talk and surface-level interactions. Crowds and social performance become overwhelmingly exhausting. The soul instinctively seeks separation to be heard, as growth of consciousness is impossible if one remains embedded in the collective thinking and external expectations. The courage to be alone. The core task of individuation demands a temporary distance from the collective. The ego wants to belong, but the soul wants to become. This solitude is an incubation period, a time for the inner life to consolidate. The individual often faces being misunderstood by others, labeled distant or changed. The ability to endure these judgments while listening to the inner voice is evidence of true evolution. In this quiet, the inner center forms, an anchor that is not dependent on external approval or validation. Part 7. The purposeful loss of motivation. One of the most confusing signals of transformation is a sudden, inexplicable loss of motivation for old goals. In a culture obsessed with achievement, this is perceived as failure, but Jung saw it as a sacred pause, the soul's restructuring. The liminal space. The psyche withdraws energy from the routines, ambitions, and activities that serve the old ego-based life. This results in apathy or disconnection. The individual is suspended in a liminal space, a threshold between the person they were and the person they are becoming. The ego no longer provides the driving force, and the self has not yet fully taken the wheel. The purpose of this pause is to force a re-evaluation of meaning, shifting focus from extrinsic metrics, status, profit, to intrinsic fulfillment, purpose, connection, truth. This period of being unmotivated is essential for the soul's compass to be entirely reset. Part 8. The emergence of the integrated self. The culmination of the psychic death, confrontation with the shadow, and inner conflict is the emergence of the integrated self. The suffering was not random. It was the mechanism of integration. the quiet authority. The final psychological state is marked by a quiet, unshakable authority. This is not egoic dominance, but the natural resonance of a person who has become whole. You no longer seek to prove yourself. You simply express who you are. Trust in one's own intuition overrides external noise and opinion. The meaning of life shifts from something to be achieved out there to something to be lived authentically in here. The transformation completes when the individual realizes that wholeness is not a destination to be reached, but a state of being that is realized through the difficult process of consciously unifying the conscious and unconscious aspects of the soul. The process turns the pain of dissolution into the power of integrity. Conclusion: stepping into your wholeness. If the insights discussed here resonate, if you recognize the signs of the cracking ego, the descent into the void, or the tumultuous rise of the shadow, then understand this: your life is not falling apart. It is preparing to be born anew. The journey through Carl Jung's individuation process is perhaps the most difficult, yet most rewarding voyage the soul can undertake. It is the alchemical fire that burns away the false, the conditioned, and the borrowed, leaving behind the resilient gold of your authentic self. You are not destined to be defined by your past or limited by your ego. You are here to realize your total potential. The transformation is already underway. Now the key is to stop resisting the fire and start working with the forces of your own depth. To continue exploring the deeper architecture of your psyche, to understand the language of your dreams, and to apply Jungian wisdom to navigate your current transformation, we invite you to join our community. Subscribe or follow us today so you never miss the next deep dive into the shadow, the archetypes, and the practical steps to integrating your truest, most powerful self. Don't just live your life. Master the art of becoming. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.